Well, let's get started. My name is Gary Carlson, one of the founders here at Factor, and today's webinar will be presented by Bob Kasenchak, longtime Factor employee, and we were talking about navigating the ethical minefield of generative AI. And I will let Bob take it over, get it going. Just on a few logistical notes today, we will be asking you to put things, add things into the chat window and stuff like that. I will be moderating, and chances are we will cover questions at the end. So please put your questions in there during the presentation, and we'll definitely do our best to get to them at the end of the presentation itself. And with that, I will hand it over to Bob.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Bob Kasenchak. I'm an information architect at Factor. I specialize in taxonomy, ontologies, and semantic technologies, but over the past couple of years, I've been talking a lot about AI ethics at in various conferences and other places, and so we thought we'd put together a webinar summarizing some of my thoughts. So one of these things is a meeting controller. So I'm not a professional ethicist. I'm an information architect. So by way of justifying my credentials to give this ethics talk today, my background is first in classics and philosophy at St. John's College in Santa Fe, and then in music at New England Conservatory and the University of Texas. And finally, after abandoning academia for the information industry, in taxonomies and information architecture. Also, as may be apparent from this slide, I am not a graphic designer. And very briefly, for additional context, you probably all know this since you joined our webinar, but Factor is an information architecture and human experience consultancy. We help large organizations with large information problems get their head around their information problems. Factor is based in Seattle, although I live in sunny Albuquerque, New Mexico. So let's dive right in. Quickly, though, just to make sure all the technology is working and everyone's comfortable using the chat function, if you want to drop a note in the chat about where you're joining from, just drop a quick note in the webinar chat, and let's make sure everything's working here. Perfect. Got some people from all over the place. Oh, Daisy's from London. Thanks for joining us, Daisy. Probably the end of your day. Fantastic. So that all seems to be working great. Thank you very much. Okay, that's great. So again, today I'm here to talk about ethics. Here's a very short outline of today's talk. Briefly, I will examine some ethical frameworks for talking about generative AI, discuss why I think consequentialist ethics is a good and useful framework for this discussion, and then talk about ethical risks and some possible ways forward. So what are we talking about when we talk about AI ethics or ethical AI? Although there are many types of AI, and we all here already acknowledge that artificial intelligence is really shorthand for various automation processes, that artificial intelligence is a marketing term because it's not intelligent, generative AI has stolen most of the oxygen out of the AI room over the past couple of years. So I'm speaking here about generative AI in general, although I will use AI as a shorthand. Clearly, I am not the only one interested in this. There are a lot of questions around the ethics of AI, and there are a bunch of groups and organizations working on explicating and tackling these issues. The link provided in this slide here, it has a good list of communities working on AI ethics, and I encourage you to check it out. I will also provide some additional links and resources at the very end of the presentation. So there are, to put it mildly, a lot of ethical issues around AI. If you accept the premise that there are some ethical risks involved with AI use, one might usefully ask whether it's at all ethical to push AI into everything. Just in business and sort of standard personal computer use, we now see it in search, in your document software, in your email, and pretty much everywhere else you turn. Without asking anyone if this was a feature they wanted or wanted to pay for. And this makes us complicit in the ethical consequences of deploying generative AI at scale. Because to be clear, it is at scale implementations that carry the most ethical risks. So why is it so hard to opt out? Other questions have been around as long as all kinds of automation. Is replacing people with machines, never mind whether they're competent machines, ethical? It certainly seems to be demoralizing. This recent article from Aftermath, and with all my sources, the link to my receipts, the links to my Sources are in the slides. This recent article from Aftermath reflects what's going on in many workspaces. Executives who don't understand what AI is, or can do, or isn't, or can't do, are mandating the use of AI, replacing workers or threatening to replace workers with tools that may or may not be useful. This is disturbing. Hey, why aren't you using ChatGPT? This seems at best coercive and at worst hopelessly clueless, and either way, not super ethical. How do the people who make decisions about bringing in AI consider the people who are expected to use it? What are the consequences of such decisions? So I think that in order to have a productive, short conversation and point of view, we need to focus our inquiry a bit more. Many of the groups working with ethical AI are concerned with the questions, how can we get AI to behave ethically? Or is AI good or bad? Now, I readily concede that both of these questions are interesting, but the question I'm interested in exploring today is what happens when we use generative AI, and more specifically, what happens when we use Gen AI at scale? This is a much different question, and I think it requires selecting an appropriate ethical framework to consider. So, how can we evaluate this question? What is a good ethical framework for discussing what happens when we deploy Gen AI at scale? And what are our options? So before we dive in there, I just want to ask again for all of you to pop in the chat if you feel like it, and let me know, are you currently engaged in any AI initiatives, whether it's where you work or at clients that you're helping? Are you engaged with AI initiatives in any way? Pop open the chat. Oh no, there's two Eric Lees. That's fantastic. Oh, it seems like generally, yes, at least a little bit, everyone is engaged in AI initiatives, and that's hardly surprising. Over the past 2 years, it's really exploded. So let's talk a little bit about ethical frameworks as understood in the discipline of philosophy. I promise not to spend too much time on this. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, I'm a taxonomist with a background in philosophy. So I naturally took a taxonomist perspective. Here is a very high level outline of the discipline of philosophy. Full disclosure, in the interest of ethics, of all of the taxonomy modeling that I'm going to show in the next couple of slides is done in Synaptica's tool Graphite. I am not, but previously have been associated with this company. But right now, it's just that I happen to have access to the tool, and all work shown is my own. So, in addition to being informed by my own background, I tried to understand this structure, a general outline of philosophy, by examining online resources, including but not limited to Wikipedia, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a fantastic free resource if you don't know about it, on various philosophy departments and their offerings at major universities. So I have concluded, I think, that the generally understood major subfields of philosophy are metaphysics, logic, epistemology, and axiology. Axiology is the study of goodness, values, and how we value things. Therefore, ethics is a major subfield of axiology. Within the discipline of ethics, the major subfields are applied ethics. The concept of technoethics is certainly relevant here. Descriptive ethics, metaethics, and normative ethics. While descriptive ethics or comparative ethics studies people's beliefs about morality, and metaethics is concerned with questions like, what is morality anyway? Normative ethics is a more practical field that seeks to answer questions like, how ought we to act? Is X ethical? And what are ethical ways to live? So in this case, I think the appropriate venue for our inquiry is answering the question at hand, is what are the ethics of what happens when we apply generative AI at scale, as what I want to do is interrogate the question, should we do X? So within normative ethics, the major subfields are consequentialist ethics, what happens if I do X? Deontological ethics, which views ethics as a set of rules to be followed regardless of the outcome, like Kantian ethics, and virtue ethics, which is a weird subfield based on what a theoretical virtuous person would do. So since I'm concerned with the question, what happens when we deploy GenAI at scale, I think consequentialism is a logical and applicable framework for answering this question. So what is consequentialism or consequentialist ethics? In short, the unifying principle is that moral action is not abstractly rule-based, which is, as described, the domain of deontology, but rather entirely based on the consequences of your actions. The motive or principle behind an action is irrelevant. You meant to do good, but what happened when you acted? What's important is what happens when we do X. What are the outcomes or results? And that outcomes and results are the best way to judge the morality of an action despite anyone's intentions. This framework, I think, is appropriate because deontological or principle-based ethics can only tell us that automation is good or progress is good, which are completely abstracted from the consequences of our actions. So here's the quick screenshot on consequentialism from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which again, I recommend. Now, if you're online at all, you have almost certainly encountered this memorably, if crudely drawn, meme cartoon and many variations of it, illustrating a classic ethical problem called the trolley problem. The choice being you control the lever that says where the trolley goes. You can kill one person or a bunch of people. Yes, killing people is bad. Yes, it's going to be bad no matter what, but which is less bad? This leads one down a path towards utilitarianism, which is a subclass, if you will, of consequentialism. I don't want to get into that today, but I think this is illustrative of the basic principle of consequentialism. What happens if I do X or do not do X? Not all situations, of course, are quite this binary, but it's still a good illustration. So let's consider just for 1 second what it looks like if we take the opposite approach, a deontological approach, and say that automation is good. For example, it doesn't matter what happens when we use automation at all. It's only important that we use automation because it is capital G good. This again ignores the consequences of our actions. If I invent a rocket ship that can get a colony of humans to Mars, and its novel engine technology is powered by the combustion of puppies and orphans, must we use it to go to Mars because progress is good? I say no. No, we should not. This seems like a pretty easy ethical question to me, but the realm of deontology doesn't give us the consequentialist point of view that I'm looking for. It merely holds up value statements as true. So to reiterate, I am interested in the question, what happens when we use GenAI at scale? Not how can I get GenAI to produce ethical content, or is AI good or bad? So I think we're going to use a consequentialist framework as a logical framework to pursue. So now that I hopefully briefly have provided a vague ethical framework for us, let's move on to discussing the consequentialist risks of deploying GenAI at scale. So we have a lot of information at this point after a couple of years about what happens when GenAI is deployed at scale. Far too many examples to mention, and I'm completely certain that all of you have seen many of these examples in the wild. So I'm going to limit myself to a few, besides we're constrained by time, by the webinar and our jobs. So in short, the ethical risks of deploying GenAI at scale include performance of the systems and the subsequent poisoning of information ecosystem, misinformation, environmental risks, mostly due to construction of dirty power to supply the energy-starved data centers being built to meet AI demand, copyright infringement and training data, reputational risk from providing misinformation, bad experiences, replacing humans for the sake of cutting the workforce with no appreciable productivity gain, and consequently, passively encouraging the continued adoption and deployment of GenAI at scale. So let's start with a fun one. All inferential systems are, and always have been, garbage in, garbage out machines. If you input biased data, and if you're taking the entire internet that you scraped as your data source, there's a lot of biased information out there. If you input biased data, you'll get biased results. This is pretty simple and has been a basic principle of information processing for many, many decades. This seems bad. I'm going to say that AI overwhelmingly prefers white and male job candidates is bad. How could this have happened? It's a mystery, but GenAI is going to save time by automating rote tasks. And there are hundreds of examples of GenAI providing false, misleading, or straight up inaccurate information, some of which can cause real harm. I selected this example because it seems particularly terrible. Did no one test this before releasing it? I am not a mycologist. Shockingly, the easy access to and perpetuation of technology to essentially generate plausible-looking nonsense prose and publish it to the internet is causing problems. This is perhaps less objectively awful than hiring bias or poisonous mushrooms, but if you, like me, think that Wikipedia is a valuable and important resource, this isn't great, and it's just one example. And this problem of misinformation perpetuates as it snowballs. If you feed garbage into the garbage in, garbage out machine, you get refined garbage. I am not a garbageologist, but there is a such thing called model collapse where AI trained on AI generated information just gets more and more nonsensical as that process iterates. Here's a fun one from the Associated Press. An AI powered transcription tool makes stuff up in hospitals. Transcription, by the way, is largely a solved problem. Speech to text does not require artificial intelligence and inferential language generation. It's a deterministic process. Speech to text applications have been around for decades. There's absolutely no conceivable need to hook one up to an energy starved LLM to do this. But regardless, this is bad. Information hospitals is used directly to plan for and provide care to patients. This is going to kill someone. I'm again going to say this is consequentially speaking bad. I am not, however, a physician. And the environmental consequences of deploying GenAI at scale are honestly kind of unbelievable. In addition to spinning up new sources of dirty and risky power, the AI boom, as this article says, is reviving nuclear power just to power itself. Integrating GenAI into search, which is exactly what most search engines have been doing without any option to get out of it, are basically ruining their core product to a breathtaking extent and using 5 times as much energy to run an AI assisted search as what we think of as now a classic or traditional Google search. Do you know how many Google searches are processed every day? It's around 8.5 billion. So if you quintuple the energy usage required for each of those searches, you have serious environmental consequences. Because AI energy demand is an emergency. This is not an exaggeration. In an era defined by accelerating environmental degradation, strains on the power grid, and scarcity of water, is this the best use of our resources? Is it ethical to push or deploy this technology at scale? Because there are also many questions swirling around what is fair game for training data and inputs for LLMs. These technologies are starved for input data. More data is better, more data is better. And copyright restrictions and consent to use data has been one of the first battlegrounds. On one side, the AI companies are saying, well, if it's published on the web, it's fair game. Seems to be the prevailing attitude. But this runs counter to actual copyright laws. There is also a rush by other companies to quietly change their terms of service to provide all of their user generated data and content, presumably for piles of money, to GenAI companies. This is at minimum ethically fraught, and it has caused some backlash. And I can't wait to tell you this next story. So in 2023, a bunch of Redditors on a World of Warcraft subreddit suspected that a bot was scraping their content without their permission to write AI generated news stories. So they decided to fight back. They started posting a bunch of stuff on their subreddit about a new World of Warcraft character named Glorbo. I can't wait for Glorbo. We've been looking forward to Glorbo for so long. Glorbo does not exist. It was completely an invention of these users in order to poison the bot that was scraping their content to write generated articles. And true to form, the scraping bot picked it up and generated an article about it. Warcraft players excited for Glorbo. They called it out and the article was taken down. But naturally, as I have a screenshot of it here, it had already been preserved for posterity. This story is about a customer who interacted with Air Canada's chatbot to purchase tickets on a bereavement fare. Someone had died, and he went to the website to see if he could get a reimbursement for his bereavement fare or something, a discount. And so he went to their website. The information it gave him was false. This was, by the way, entirely predictable. Air Canada tried to deny responsibility for the information its chatbot provided and was laughed out of court in Canada. This is first extremely not ethical. We deployed a thing, but are not responsible for it at all. But it also carries massive reputational risk to organizations using this technology, especially as customer facing answer machines. I think it also must be said that massive companies deploying GenAI at scale, despite the risks and ethical issues, encourage other massive companies to deploy GenAI at scale despite the risks and ethical issues. I think we have to ask who benefits from this, because something like 80% of enterprise AI projects fail. I found this article on the Harvard Business Review. Sadly, beneath the aspirational headlines and tantalizing potential lies a sobering reality. Most AI projects fail. Some estimates place the failure rate as high as 80%, almost double the rate of corporate IT project failures from a decade ago. So during my recent research, I have found that this magnitude of failure rate is still common. From this article and other sources, the following themes emerge: bad data, conflicting or outdated inputs, lack of testing, lack of measurement, lack of oversight, and lack or complete absence of governance. And perhaps most damning of all, the complete lack of alignment or purpose. Many AI projects, it seems, are undertaken for fear of missing out. We have to do the AI or we're going to get left behind. Anyone, excuse me, anyone who has worked with large information systems knows that this kind of lack of focus or goal and alignment spells trouble for large scale projects. Why are you doing this? What is your goal? If the goal is use AI to do something so we can say we're using AI, that is not a good basis for a project, as anyone who's managed projects can tell you. Another emerging risk is that given the constant stream of articles, like those in the previous slides, public sentiment has been and is turning rapidly against AI in general. People are not interested in having AI in everything. Well, that's only partially true. Some people, notably business leaders who don't understand AI beyond, oh crap, if we can't say we have the AI, we're going to get left behind and I need to make the line go up, seem very interested in AI, or rather in what they think AI can do for their stock price. I am not a stockologist. I could, of course, provide many, many, many more examples, but you've all seen them. There's articles coming out all the time. So, having gone through some examples of risky deployments of Gen AI, returning to my opening question maybe isn't even useful, as it's clear that the consequences can be and already are at least somewhat dire. So, what do we do now? So I'd like to pause again here. Many of you said that your organizations or client organizations were working in AI with AI in some way. Is anyone in your organization or your client organization working with the ethics of AI? Do you have subcommittees or boards or people interested in AI ethics at all? Okay, that's good to hear. It seems like at least some people are engaged in AI ethics, or at least have people who are thinking about the ethics. So let's move on. So, as Raj said in the comment, we're not getting rid of Gen AI. We can perhaps discourage thoughtless deployments at scale, but we can't put the genie back in the bottle. And any notion of boycotting Gen AI at the consumer or even professional level is pretty much shouting into the void. So what can we do to mitigate risk, reduce ethical issues, and be productive by responsibly using automation tools instead of trying to solve every problem ever by throwing AI at it? So first, information architecture is capable of addressing all the poorly addressed use cases above, and in some cases better than Gen AI can. AI can also help to train and improve AI models by providing structured data, by which we mean taxonomies, ontologies, and knowledge graphs, and structured content with good metadata. This will not alleviate all the problems we have talked about, but it can mitigate harm, provide alternative solutions, and try and gently nudge our clients to better and more ethical solutions when possible. So, if we're to use these tools ethically, it's important to understand what they are and what they are not good at. Dr. Emily Bender at the University of Washington has done a great deal of work on Gen AI, and I recommend her writings. This quote sums it up pretty nicely. We need first to help our clients and our organizations identify what Gen AI is good at and what it's not good at, and what is ethically risky and what is, relatively speaking, ethically safe. We should also be aware that in knowledge management and information science, we have lots of existing solutions for problems that are perfectly good at producing results without generative technologies like transcription. Solutions for which the outputs are calculated or retrieved, and you need to get the same answer every time. I call these solutions deterministic. They have a consistent output given an input, are reliable, and do not require flexibility of user interfaces. You can run a program or write a query or write a script, for example, and you'll know you'll get the same answer from the database every time. On the Gen AI side, I call the solutions probabilistic because the output is statistically generated using the AI model and including, and this is one of its huge advantages of this technology, is a very, very friendly and flexible input in the form of a natural language type chat box. One of the major breakthroughs of GenAI technology is this flexible user input model. You don't need to know any scripting. You don't need any training. You type your natural language question into the box and the thing produces an answer. That is very attractive and it's a very powerful technology. So briefly, deterministic or traditional solutions produce retrieved or calculated input. They're consistent and reliable, like traditional search, natural language processing applications, and database queries. They do require more structured and rigorous inputs, and in some cases require specialist training to do an input like write a query. Probabilistic methods are statistical, generative, and may not produce the same answer every time, but have very flexible user input models. So it seems to me that some kind of heuristic would be appropriate here. When should we consider a generative, that is a probabilistic solution, versus a traditional or deterministic solution? In short, if accuracy is at a premium, or if the harm caused by errors or variability is great, the best path is probably to use a traditional in finger quotes, deterministic information science or computer science solution. If the risk is very low, think product or content recommendation engines that could be served very well by highly variable or unstructured user input, or writing a boilerplate or low risk bootstrapping code or prose. That a generative solution is likely a decent choice, assuming you're okay with the other risks that we discussed today. Therefore, high-risk use cases can be pretty easy to identify. They all come down to not pretending that Gen AI is short for general purpose AI, because it's not. And it's probably pretty clear now what I have concluded is risky, but I do want to talk about some useful low-risk applications and uses. For example, generating data structures, basic task assistance, bootstrapping code, starting to write birthday greetings to your grandmother, which seems kind of cold, but these are all low risk solutions. If I can take some data and ask GenAI to throw it into a CSV file, I can import into Excel, are logical and safe uses. Anything you're doing at your desktop and not being deployed at scale is generally relatively safe. There's relatively low risk of misinformation and low risk of harm. So generating boilerplate text, scripting, bootstrapping, generating sample data sets. In all of these cases, care should be taken to use the generated text as a starting point to be shaped and edited by humans, but small-scale deployments generally are far lower in every kind of ethical risk than large-scale implementations. So, for example, one of my colleagues regularly uses ChatGPT to generate Python scripts, and it seems to mostly work well. I don't know why I pasted some Python code into a slide, but I did. This makes a ton of sense. It automates a rote task, which is all what automation tools are good for. I've used it to convert things from one data format to another, which again saves time spent on rote tasks. Just don't assume the output is 100% good to go. Make sure and review it, but data wrangling tasks are great low risk applications. And I think perhaps the most interesting and powerful application is finding patterns in large data sets, including large content sets, which from my point of view is just non or lightly structured data. But the novel thing here is not pattern recognition, although the word relation stuff in the background is doing some work. The real benefit here, again, is the query parser. You don't need to go find a data scientist or a coder to write a script or an algorithm for you. Anyone can instead do pattern finding and data mining with a natural language prompt from a GenAI tool. This has the potential to save a whole lot of time and effort and leverages what the technology is really good at, and it's not deploying it at a massive scale. So there are ways forward, I think, that leverage this technology for what it is good at and avoids risky applications, especially pretending that it's a search engine or a knowledge base. Ignore the hype, understand low-risk applications for things like task assistance, and carefully weigh the risks involved. If you'd like to talk more about AI ethics or how information architecture can help, please feel free to book a consultation with Factor or drop us an email, and we'd love to continue our conversation with you. And then I did promise and threw together a few other resources that I recommend checking out from UNESCO, Stanford and a couple other places. Like I said at the beginning, there are a lot of places working on GenAI, but these I thought were some helpful resources to get started if anyone's interested.